Hotel staff of Reddit, what is the creepiest, weirdest, most unexplained event that you've experienced on the job? When I got a call to let a locked out guest into their room and came across a disheveled looking Kid Rock waiting outside of his suite wearing a gold thong. My co-worker was an adorable little old Asian man who was very hard to understand. He was the housekeeper on weekends, so I would work with him most of the time. He was the weirdest thing at the hotel, but I'm sure it was a cultural thing for him. What I could understand from him, and from stories from co-workers, is that he very much believed in spirits. He claimed to have banished an evil spirit from the kitchen, and he also claimed that the third floor was haunted by a woman. The weirdest thing he did was, one day in the winter, he brought a freaking pigeon into the hotel. It was snowing outside, and the hotel was moderately busy that night. But he kept this pigeon with him the entire time, and the damn thing never wanted to fly away, would just walk around with him, or stay on his cleaning cart. The reason he kept it close is because he said it was a woman in its past life, and she was cold and lonely. So he took it in, and cared for her/it. It lasted that weekend, then I think our general manager made him get rid of it, or stop bringing it into the hotel. According to my co-workers, he brought it home. I'm laughing just thinking about it. I'm a setup manager at a hotel for big events. I was double checking all the rooms before I went home for the day, and I went into one of the event rooms and flicked on the lights. I shoot you not, there was a grown ass naked man in the dark. He flinched when I turned the lights on, and it scared me. I sorta yelled, "What are you doing?" Turns out he was swimming and needed a place to change. Instead of just going to his room like a normal person would, he chose a dark event room. Okay, super creepy story time. I work at a mid-tier popular hotel in the south on the 3 to 11 PM shift. About a month and a half ago I get a call from an older man working at the Haynes company, trying to check on a reservation. Apparently the reservation didn't pop up in our system, so he then starts asking me if it's okay if guests who stay at the hotel can get packages shipped to them during their stay. Sure, whatever, we will sign for them too. He then slides in a worst case scenario, you guys will end up with 300 pairs of stockings. That was it. Or so I thought. Proceed to 2 weeks ago around 9 PM. The phone rings, and it's the Haynes man again. But this time he sounds a little off. Super soft voice with almost shallow breathing. Has checking on the reservation again, which still isn't there. As I try to offer to make the reservation, he cuts me off to tell me that the package of stockings will be coming in. And then even more shallow breathing, in the creepiest softest voice asks, "Do you wear thigh highs?" I still can't shake the tone of voice. I hung up so quick and locked the doors. Oh man. So back in the mid-80s I was stationed in Hawaii. I needed some extra cash, so I picked up a gig working security at a hotel. This particular hotel had a smaller hotel next to it that was owned by one of the major airlines. We basically provided check-in and check-out services for them, but I never really did much for them in terms of security other than chase off the occasional drunk guy trying to follow the flight attendants into the hotel. One night I got a call asking me to come up to one of the higher floors of the hotel to try and quiet things down. These floors were typically where the pilots stayed and had bigger rooms, and usually were the ones without much issue. The elevators opened to 2 buck-naked pilots chasing 5 naked flight attendants around the hall. The entire group were trashed, and there were signs that there was probably some coke in one of the rooms. On seeing me, one of the pilots told me to get out of my clothes because they needed more CCK if they were going to tame these wild women. I politely declined and told them that they were going to have to keep it down because we were getting complaints. The pilot saluted, herded the women into his room, and closed the door. Not sure what happened, but there weren't any more noise complaints. The weird part was for the next 3 months I had the job, I would routinely see the pilots and the flight attendants in question. All acted as if nothing happened, and I never had another complaint. Not a hotel staff, but a customer who likes to do funny pranks at hotels I stayed at for work. My favorite one was leaving up shrines for Jeff Goldblum, candles, pictures, and all when I was checking out. After doing this at one hotel a few times, the next time I got called out for work and had a hotel booked, They must have recognized my name, because when I got to me room there was a framed picture of Jeff Goldblum with candles around it. Now that's what I call good customer service. I've worked as a front desk employee for over a year now. Story time. On a slower night I was working the front desk by myself, and we didn't have any housekeeping/houseman working that night, so I was completely alone aside from the guests in the hotel. I'm a 55, 120 pound girl, by the way. This will matter in a minute. A big burly dude walks in, and I can tell immediately that he has some form of mental handicap. I ask him if there's anything I can help him with, and he says I need to call the cops. Now, in like a shooter for cock, play it cool. I ask him if it's an emergency and he says he just needs the cops here. Has ran away from home. Thus far he hadn't seemed threatening, so I do call the police, but I call the non-emergency number. They usually respond pretty quickly. He puts his hand out, like he would like to speak to the operator, so I hand him the phone. I cold hear the operator, but I assumed she asked him what the problem was. He proceeds to answer with I ran away from home and am suicidal. And very homicidal. I'm of course like WTF, but I'm trying to keep the situation calm. I give the operator the address and the dude waits in the lobby staring at me until I secretly call our security company to send someone out, who then escorts him off property. Cops showed up about 30 minutes later and never bothered to find the guy. 10/10ths thought I was going to have to fight off a handicapped dude, and I was pretty upset the cops didn't take it more seriously and try to find him. TL. Doctor, big handicapped dude told me to call the cops because he ran away from home and was suicidal and homicidal. Proceeded to stare at me until I called security to take him off property. Fun times. We like to talk about which hotels are the most haunted. There is one that is notoriously more haunted than the others. One story that sticks out is a friend was plugging in and barks in a creepy ballroom. The Kinect discovered him as player 1, and then discovered a player 2 standing next to him. There was no one else in the room, but the player 2 arrow on the screen was right next to him. Then the player 2 arrow just walked away and out of view of the screen. I've had several weird and scary moments happen while working in a hotel in DC. From suicides in luxury suites to terrorist claims, working in the hospitality industry will definitely have you talking about something. One of the most scariest things I've witnessed firsthand is having the fireplace in our lobby explode almost right in front of my face. It all started in the morning when the lobby began to smell a little bit like gas. Usually it's never a problem because the restaurant is next to the front lobby, but after several complaints we decided to look for the source. Turns out the fireplace was causing the smell. It was gas starting fireplace. One of the new guys tried to adjust the temperature on it, and instead the fireplace reacted unexpectedly and started a 3 feet flame. One of the bartenders tried to blow it out with the fire extinguisher, but turns out it was not the correct one to use, and it caused the fireplace to explode and create an even bigger flame. All I remember is falling to the ground because of the explosion, and the sprinklers went off. The entire front lobby and restaurant were flooded. I thought I was going to be able to leave work, and they still made me stay my whole shift. Lesson learned from this incident: not all fire extinguishers are used for the same purpose. There's like 4 different kinds to stop a specific fire. Now the creepiest request I ever got was to find an escort for a gentleman and giving a room to a prankster. DC hotels for you. We once had a double leg amputee guest who was also an alcoholic. He got around in a motorized wheelchair, and his caretaker/nurse came with him for this trip. One night, he was down in the lobby, drunk, and his caretaker had clearly had enough of him for the day. He was cruising around the lobby in his wheelchair, taking turns way too fast. It was raining that night, so the tile floors were a little slick, and yes, the signs were up. Anytime he would zoom by his caretaker, she would half-heartedly tell him to stop, but he didn't care. The front desk staff kept asking him to slow down, but he would just flip them off, mumble something, and go faster. This particular hotel had a very steep ramp in the front next to the stairs. The ramp was not for wheelchairs, it was only to help people bring luggage in/out, and the sign next to the ramp clearly stated that. In his drunk and agitated stupor, he didn't read the sign and went flying down the ramp. He toppled out of the wheelchair and tumbled down the ramp as over tea kettle, like an egg. As soon as he hit the ground, he started yelling about suing the hotel and how he was going to take all their money. The poor security guard working had to pick the guy up to put him back in his wheelchair while he was still screaming. Then the security guard just slinked away as fast as possible. I still laugh anytime I think about that one. Another time we got a call at the front desk from a guest saying the person in the next room was screaming. A couple people went up to check it out, and somehow a morbidly obese man at least 400 plus lbs had gotten himself stuck when he was in the shower. I don't know what he was going for, but he got himself wedged in between the shower and toilet, kind of half sticking out of the shower. He was completely stuck and saying that his knee was going to give out any second. The fire department had to come and cut him out. But it was that same poor security guard that was tasked with holding up a fat, dripping wet naked man until the fire department got there. If anyone at that hotel deserved a raise, it was that security guard. Has seen some shoot. My dad used to work in a hotel. A few years ago, he hears a scream from a maid as she's cleaning one of the rooms. He runs in, and there's a giant python just chilling in the bathtub. This thing is apparently like 4 feet long. They tried to track down the couple who had just checked out of the room, but the number feed given the front desk wasn't working. Eventually animal control showed up and took the snake. That poor maid was terrified to clean the bathrooms for a while. Edit. Some have pointed out that using the word giant to describe a 4-foot long snake is a bit of a hyperbole. Maybe so, but 4 feet of python is definitely a huge shock when you're not expecting it. It's not under the same category, but I've worked in hotel for almost 13 years and have an interesting story. My co-worker is a bellman at a hotel, and one night he was assisting a young couple / guests with their luggage, or so we thought. He assisted the guests with 2 full carts of, mostly random, odd looking stuff, and few luggage. The gentleman seemed to be normal, but his girlfriend was on drugs, not the pharmaceutical kind either. So, my co-worker spent over 40 minutes unloading their stuff from the car, then to their room. Now he had bunch of boxes with random things. Long black cases looked like rifle cases, and bullet cases, and weird looking machines that couldn't be identified. After chatting with him, lot of his stories didn't add up at all, and sounded very shady. After my co-worker finished assisting him, he did not give my co-worker any gratuity for assisting with all of his stuff. After being annoyed for all the services he did for our guests, feeling uneasy about him being really shady as well, my co-worker ended up just looking up his name online. We found out the guest had a warrant for arrest in another state. His warrant was for drug possession, dealing, indecent exposure, and gun possessions. Also, on the warrant said he is armed and dangerous. So my co-worker went to management / security and they decided to call our local police department. They looked up his info in the police department, came in with full arsenal and arrested him. He had massive amount of drugs with intent to distribute and weapon possessions. The guest was arrested and taken back to the state and put in jail. Moral of the story is, always tip your bellman, especially if you're doing shady / illegal activities in the hotel. Going on 20 years ago, I worked at a Holiday Inn. There were always a number of people that actually lived there, paying for rooms by the month. Yeah, I'd see them at the bar. Hell, one guy was so trusted we gave him keys to the kitchen. He'd go in there late at night and make the front desk sandwiches. One of these dudes was walking around one night with a paper lunch sack full of $100 bills. He was going up to everybody he could at the bar, in the lobby, and gave out his hundreds. People actually complained about it because it freaked them out a bit. Not me, I took 100. The next morning he was found dead in his room by the cleaning crew. Suicide. Not a hotel, but I work maintenance for a vacation cabin rental company. One night, I get a call from a guest that she has mice in her cabin. So I grab some traps and bait and head up. She was there by herself. Little strange, but I made some small talk as I set up the traps. She said her husband worked a couple states away and was supposed to meet her there later that night. The next morning they were due to check out at 11. Noon comes and they're still in, so the front desk tries calling. No answer. 12:30 comes, and housekeeping needs to get in to clean as it was a turnover, so front desk tells them to knock and go in case the guest is asleep or something. She had attempted suicide by overdosing on pills when her husband never showed. She was unconscious, but still had a pulse, so she left by ambulance. I think she ended up living. Thinking back afterwards, I remembered thinking it was a little odd how many prescription pill bottles she had in plain sight the night I was in there. We also have one lodge that sleeps 24 people. That's really creepy when you're alone. I've had multiple people, some who have never worked or stayed there, tell me matter-of-factly that a man hung himself in the upstairs bedroom. I'm not sure, but I hate being there by myself. I've heard footsteps on multiple occasions, had doors shut or open themselves while I was in there with no draft, seen shadows out of the corner of my eye, etc. My uncle used to work at a crappy motel in upstate New York. There was always some shady clientele coming through but nothing to write home about. One day a customer complained about his room smelling, so my uncle took note and carried on with his work. The next day another customer complained about a smell in their room. It was the same room. My uncle gave in and went to find the source. He walked in and immediately smelled it. An animal must have gotten into the wall and died because it was awful. It smelled like it was coming from behind the bed, so he tried to move it but couldn't. He removed the mattress to make it easier. The bed was a solid oak frame that went down to the floor and a mattress that sat on top of it. Underneath the mattress inside the square oaken frame was a dead body. They later found out it was a mob killing, and they stashed it there a week or so ago, and it began to smell and permeate the mattress and oak frame. He didn't work there much longer after that. Edit. I called my dad to confirm, and he said my uncle actually was working in Long Island and this was the 80s, so it matches with the Minneapolis story some of y'all have found. Creepy AF. Also similar to the Iceman killer stories but not the same location I don't think. I'm a housekeeper. I've walked in on a few people having sex or being naked, but they are usually pretty embarrassed. But this one time, when I had just started, I knocked on the door to clean this guy's room. He opened it just to peek, so he could see who was at the door. I thought, he must be in a towel or something. He's gonna tell me to come back later or go away. Well, he did, once he saw it was me, but not before flinging the door open the rest of the way, revealing he was butt-ass naked. And that's how I learned what ginger pubes look like. Still don't know what was running through the dude's mind, but he didn't have a boner, so I'm gonna rule that out. I worked at a hotel that was owned by a college. The rooms inside the courtyard were rented out to customers, but the outer rooms were meant for long-term stays and college kids. There was an old man that lived in the very front of the hotel hood for decades. He was a germaphobe and was terrified of spiders. He would come down at night and talk to me. For some reason I was super interested in everything he had to say. Mostly cause it was boring and slow at night, but he knew a lot of history about the city we live in. One night he came down to the lobby and was in tears. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that there was a spider in his room. Could I get rid of it for him? Normally, the only people allowed in his room were the housekeepers when they changed his sheets, so I had no idea what I was in store for. I opened the door to see that every inch of his room was covered in old newspapers. He had plastered them on the walls, the tables, the sinks, chairs. Everywhere. There were stacks and stacks of newspapers everywhere. I found the spider at the bathroom and killed it. Just as I was about to flush, he was like, no. I asked him what is wrong. He didn't want me to flush it because it might crawl back in. So I took this mushed spider in a tissue and out the room. He was a sweet old man, but it just really creeped me out seeing his room covered in newspapers. We have this guy who always has hookers. Not that surprising, since we are a brand that promotes a party lifestyle. But recently the dude came down and asked me to give him a different room, was super vague about his reasoning. The room wasn't cleaned well enough. So whatever, I do it, and about 30 minutes later we get a call down from the original room, which in our system comes up as vacant, from a woman attempting to order room service. Red flag. So essentially the scumbag banged one lady, switched rooms, got a new hooker, and left the first one in the original room. My supervisor had to interrupt his back-to-back session for some explanation, and he just had his tail between his legs. Lol. I worked as an interim night auditor. The first night on the job, a man calls to the desk and asks for bath towels. I felt weird about the way he had asked, so I asked security to come up with me. Sure enough, the man has no pants on. People, when you go to a hotel and there are girls working the front desk, it's not usually the case that the girls are just going to your room to bring towels, and they're not going to respond to your sexual advances. Seriously, people, put your freaking dick away. I'm probably late to this, but whatever. I have 2 stories from when I said to work at the Queen Mary. I had always heard about it being haunted, but I was always a skeptic about anything paranormal. I'd usually work the 3rd shift from 10 PM to 6 AM. Our job usually consisted of tearing down 4 parties that were held at night and setting up 4 breakfast caterings in the morning. So there was a lot of downtime in between those events. For the most part we'd hang out in our warehouse/storage room. The warehouse was located to one of the old pools that would rained. One night me and my co-workers were just chilling there waiting for a party to end when we started hear the sounds of kids laughing. It was one of those eerie HOI laughs that just sent chills down all of our spines, but then we also started hearing splashing sounds. A look of terror fell across all of our faces. Eventually we all got the courage to look outside, and when we got to the pool you could see wet footprints that lead from the pool to the door of our warehouse. We all just noped the fuck out of there. This second incident wasn't as scary. On another night we had to clean up after a party around 2 AM. While cleaning up one of my co-workers told me to look up and check out this hot girl. Up on the upper deck of the boat you could see this beautiful woman in a red Sikh tail looking down at us. Being the teenager that I was, my co-worker and I decided to try and get a closer look. We climbed up the stairs to the upper deck in order to get a better look, but in the time it took to climb up the stairs she had disappeared. Never really believed in ghosts, but after working there for about a month I truly became a believer in the paranormal. I worked the front desk, and this elderly Asian man repeatedly came and asked for the small lotion containers. I didn't think anything of it, but one morning he came down and seemed really upset. He yelled halfway in his own language saying that the staff was not supplying him with enough lotion. I asked housekeeping if they'd put some extra ones in his room to keep him happy. However, the next morning he came again to complain. I finally got an empty showbox-sized tub and filled it with the at least 50 lotion bottles. I've never seen a man so content with a box full of lotion. My friend and I landed jobs in the same hotel. We both worked the night shifts on weekends, and we were the only employees there. He was reception. I was the bellboy plus security plus gopher. We were bored one night, so I dragged the helium tank for balloons, I guess. Maybe for weddings, from storage and in the admin offices behind the front desk. And we proceeded to answer telephone calls with high-pitched voices all night long. Not sure if it's creepy, but I'm sure it was weird for the callers. I cleaned hotels at the end of each week at a family camp one summer. They had large communal kitchens on each floor, so people could bring their own food if they wanted. At the end of one camp week, someone left a full, unopened, large jar of Nutella in the kitchen that day. I gained a brand new free jar of Nutella and a very heavy sense of confusion for why someone would do such a thing. I'll add a category to the title. Saddest experience working at a hotel. I worked the front desk at a Best Western in Pennsylvania. My shift started at 7 AM when I relieved the clerk that works the overpass shift. 2 police officers walked into the lobby a few hours into my shift and asked if I was the clerk that checked in a certain guest. I looked in our system and saw the overpass clerk checked in a couple men and women in their 30s at about midnight. They explained to me the woman that paid for the hotel room is in trouble for stealing a credit card from a woman in New Jersey and making unauthorized purchases, which led them to the hotel once the overpass clerk ran the credit card authorization at 3 AM that morning. When I got to work that day, we have a ledger that showed you which rooms were rented/available and the names of guests. I had no interaction with the woman being tracked down by police. Because they didn't have a warrant, I couldn't just let them into her room, but I sent a cleaning lady to her room to see if she was inside and we'd take it from there if she was. The room was empty, so the police handed me a photo of the woman and asked me to call them as soon as I see her returning to her room. Not even an hour after they leave, the woman walks through the lobby with the guy she checked in with. I smiled and let them get into the elevator before I called the police. Within minutes, the out-of-town police along with local law enforcement descend upon the hotel and made it up to the hotel room the couple was staying in. When they barged in, they found the woman alone in the room. The guy that was with her moments before was gone. I saw her being led out of the hotel in handcuffs while bawling her eyes out. It turns out the woman they arrested was severely mentally challenged and she thought she was on vacation with her boyfriend when the police made the arrest. The boyfriend was the one who stole the credit card from one of the nurses from her outpatient therapy group she frequented and took her on a tri-state spending spree before he abandoned her in another state.